Hey everyone, and welcome back to Speakvora, the place where we don't just practice English, but also explore real life ideas that help you grow, improve, and understand yourself a little better each time you listen. And I'm really happy you're here with us today, because this topic is something that connects to almost everyone's life in one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like today's episode is one of those conversations where people might suddenly think, wait, I've felt this before. Because we're talking about why change feels so difficult even when we really want it. And more importantly, how people actually manage to break out of old patterns and create a completely different version of their life over time.
I recently had this moment where I was just sitting quietly and thinking about how some people seem to completely transform their lives over the years. Not in a dramatic, overnight way, but in a gradual shift where everything about them slowly starts to feel different. And I kept wondering what actually separates those people from the ones who feel stuck in the same cycle.
Yeah, I've thought about that too, especially when you meet someone who once struggled with confidence, discipline, or even something like learning a new language, and then after some time you see them again and they just seem more capable, more comfortable, and more focused. And you start asking yourself what changed in their daily life that created that difference.
And when I think about my own experience, especially when I started improving my English, I realized there was no single moment where everything suddenly clicked into place. But instead, it was a long process of repeated exposure, small improvements, mistakes, corrections, and gradual understanding that built up over time until things started to feel more natural.
Exactly, because I used to believe that becoming fluent meant reaching some final point where everything is perfect and effortless. But in reality, it was much more about consistency, showing up even when I didn't feel confident, and slowly building familiarity with the language instead of trying to master everything at once.
And that really is the main idea we want to highlight today, that real transformation rarely comes from one big decision, but instead comes from small, repeated actions that feel almost too simple to matter in the moment, but end up shaping your entire direction over time.
But I think a lot of people listening might still be wondering if change is actually possible, and if it doesn't require anything magical, then why do so many people struggle to actually move forward even when they genuinely want a better life?
One of the biggest reasons is fear, especially fear of failure, because many people assume that if they try something new and don't succeed immediately, it means they are not capable. But in reality, failure is usually just a part of learning, not a reflection of your potential.
And another big reason is confusion, because people often want change but don't know where to begin. So instead of taking a small step and learning along the way, they wait for a perfect plan or perfect timing that almost never arrives.
Then there's also the internal voice that many people deal with, the one that says things like, I'm not good enough, or this is not for me. And the problem is that these thoughts don't just stay as thoughts, they slowly shape behavior and limit what someone is willing to try in real life.
And probably one of the biggest traps is waiting for motivation, because people assume they need to feel inspired before they start, but in reality, motivation usually shows up after you take action, not before it.
That's why small, consistent actions are so powerful, because instead of trying to change your entire life in one day, you focus on small improvements that are realistic and repeatable, like practicing a little bit every day, learning one concept at a time, or building simple habits that you can actually maintain.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that these small improvements don't just add up linearly. They actually compound over time, which means that something that feels tiny in the beginning can eventually lead to massive progress if you keep doing it consistently.
For example, someone might not study for hours every day, but they might listen to short audio clips, read small texts, or practice speaking for a few minutes daily. And over time, their understanding and confidence naturally grow without overwhelming pressure.
But beyond habits, there's something even deeper that influences everything, and that is mindset. Because the way you interpret your abilities and challenges determines how you respond to them in real life.
Yes, because a growth mindset is the belief that improvement is always possible with effort and learning, while a fixed mindset creates limits by making people believe their abilities are permanent and unchangeable, even when that is not actually true.
And it's fascinating how the brain works in this way, because whatever you focus on tends to become more visible to you. So if someone constantly thinks negatively about themselves, they begin to notice evidence that supports that belief. But if they shift their thinking toward progress, they start noticing improvement instead.
That's why techniques like positive self-talk, visualization, and gratitude are not just motivational ideas, but actually practical ways of training your mind to focus on growth, possibility, and improvement instead of limitation.
And one of the biggest lessons in all of this is that waiting for the perfect moment is usually just a delay mechanism, because that perfect moment rarely appears in the way people imagine it will.
Exactly, because confidence doesn't come before action, it develops through action. And every time you try something, even imperfectly, you are building familiarity, experience, and comfort with the process of growth itself.
I can relate to that personally because I used to avoid speaking for a long time just because I was afraid of making mistakes. But when I finally started practicing, I realized that mistakes were not blocking progress, they were actually part of progress.
Another important factor that people often overlook is environment. Because the people you spend time with, the content you consume, and the energy you surround yourself with all influence your mindset and habits over time in subtle but powerful ways.
Yeah. There's that well-known idea that you become similar to the people you spend the most time with, and whether that influence is positive or negative depends heavily on what kind of environment you choose to stay in and invest your time in.
So, when you surround yourself with people who are learning, growing, and trying new things, it naturally becomes easier for you to do the same. While staying in negative or stagnant environments can make progress feel much more difficult than it actually is.
So if I had to summarize everything we discussed today, I would say that real change is not about dramatic transformations, but about consistent small actions that slowly reshape your habits, mindset, and direction in life over time.
And those small actions, when repeated consistently, eventually become part of who you are, which is why the life you want is usually built quietly in everyday choices rather than sudden life-changing moments.
So today, just pick one small step, something simple but meaningful, because progress always begins with action, not with perfect planning or perfect timing.
And if you're listening right now, remember that you don't need to have everything figured out today. You just need to start from where you are and trust that consistency will take you further than intensity ever could. Thanks for listening to Speakvora, and we'll see you in the next episode.